Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Red Eye History. Hopefully, today we're going to learn something. Now, MC is going to be talking about the Addams family, and no, I don't mean the film, though it wouldn't shock me. In all fairness, if you want to consider this guy, I don't know, Uncle Fester or something like that, I have absolutely no problem. MC, over to you, sir.
Okay, we're going to talk about Samuel Adams as opposed to his brother John Adams, who was one of the people who became president of the United States, who is far more well known on the national stage. He is not a brother. They are related. He is a cousin. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There are very few people who really know the name Sam Adams. All right, in any kind of context aside from this. All right. Right. Sam Adams, Boston Lager. That's how people think of Sam Adams, right? Now, and this is in many ways this is a crime of history, right? Because this gentleman was far more instrumental, all right, in the development of the colonies having a different view and establishing a quote unquote American view as opposed to a British view. All right. And this is one of the gentlemen, and in many ways, I mean, there's things that I have said that were mentioned at the time that nobody talks about, that only I have found that I talk about when I talk about the historical aspects of what's going on in the Revolution. Very few people actually understand this. And I have said this to you, all right, and several people, that the crown, if the British crown, if you were talking about King Charles versus King George, you would have had an entire different viewpoint, all right, that could have been created. Because the royals could have used America as a counterbalance, all right, to the British aristocracy and Parliament specifically.
Yeah,
we were in that mode. People don't recognize this. Now, let's talk about this guy in his early life. All right, Sam Adams was born to a deacon. Right, he was born to a well-off family, and I mean a very well-off family. All right, but his father was also a deacon, so that of course you have the Puritan upbringing. All right. Now he himself is very much in that mentality, but he doesn't rebel like Hancock does. Okay. This is something that people have to understand. Hancock rebelled in the fact that he wanted to be looked upon as a dandy. Right? We talked about his frivolous nature before. Right?
Yeah.
Sam Adams really took the moderation aspect, all right, to heart. All right. The work ethic, the more or less, prudish, for lack of a better term, mentality. Right, from his father. Now, his father, okay, one of the problems that we never talk about in the colonies, with colonies, is the fact that how do you trade with Britain? Okay, how do you trade internally? Okay. Why is this important? Well, because trading goods isn't necessarily easy. The advantage of money, okay, is it becomes a ubiquitous means of trade. Okay? You can trade this item for money. You may not be able to trade, nor may you want to trade. For example, let's say you have 10 chickens, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't need 10 chickens. You only want 5. So you want to sell/trade the other 5 chickens.
Yeah.
Well, you want to sell them for things that you need. right? Well, if you go to your neighbor, okay, and say, I'd like to sell you chickens, and he says, yes, I need chickens. Well, what can you give me? Well, I can give you a cow. Well, I don't need a cow. Okay, so that becomes that limits your ability to trade with that individual, even though he has a desire to trade with you, right? He doesn't have what you need, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where money comes into the fore, because money makes it easy for him to trade for those chickens. Because he can trade, he can now give you money for one of the chickens, and you can then use that money to go buy whatever buy the fleece that you wanted, because you wanted a lamb, you didn't want a cow, right?
Okay.
It allows you still to the guy to spread, for you to spread out who your trading partners are, right? Because otherwise you end up only narrowly being able to trade with the people you all right, have something to trade for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, money is just tokens. That is all it really is. It's a universally accepted form of trade. That's why they created money way back prior to the Roman era.
Oh yeah,
That's all
so
it is.
I think, but there's a reason why I'm talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the reason I'm talking about this is because in the colonies, what didn't you see? What didn't they have? They didn't have gold and silver. They didn't have money. So so when they would try to sell their goods, okay, to each other, they had no means to sell back and forth, because the amount of actual cash, the hard currency, gold and silver coinage, right, was at a premium, right?
Okay.
Now, what happened was, okay, when there's very little of that around, the cost in coinage of that chicken, instead of being a coin, one coin, whatever you want to establish it as, it's now worth 50 coins, because there's not very many, or I'm sorry, the cost of that chicken, right?
Yeah.
A gold coin, it might be one gold coin, right? It might be one coin rather than the 50 coins it is somewhere else, like across the pond.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so traders from Britain were using this to make
wonder why.
money hand over fist. Okay.
I'd like to stop you, but just before you go any further, I would like to defend Britain by stating that was more of the mercantile, not actually Britain in and of itself. Thank you very much.
Well, the mercantile class was in charge of Parliament.
I never said that was a good idea.
I'm just pointing this out. And while that, to be honest, was not a huge issue for America, the problem is that within the American colonies trading within themselves, it was a problem because of the limited coinage, right? So what the Americans started doing is they started printing their own money. All right, and the Sam Adams' father, as a deacon, was one of these people who said, you know what, we'll print our own money, all right, and create our own little banking system so that we can trade internally, right? And this would make it easier to trade with each other in the colony. Okay. Well, what would happen when you traded within the colony is people would have money in the forms of the monetary, the American monetary system. Mm-hmm. But the British traders, they wanted to trade, via gold. All right. But the amount of gold that they were willing to trade to America was limited. They didn't want to trade that. Okay. No. So when they came over to taking goods and take it to America to say, okay, we want you to buy our goods. We want you to buy our goods. We have guns. We have metal plows. We have, thimbles. We have sewing machines. Right. Mm-hmm. Well, they were like, okay, well, how do we pay for this? Well, you have to give us gold. Well, we don't have gold to pay for that. We have American script.
Yeah.
Okay. So, or we could give you a chicken, right? You see my point, right?
I do, but my imagination's taking over involving the word chicken. But carry on.
Don't go that way.
Okay.
That's going to lead to a whole different. That's going to lead to a whole different diploma.
That could be another stream all in and of itself. Yes.
All right. So the British, what these merchants did is they impressed upon the Parliament to ban the internal American banking system.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing so, they ordered the people that were running the banking system to be on the hook, all right, for all the money. And this bankrupted many, many people, including, of course, John Adams' father.
Yeah.
Right. And in fact, at one point, Samuel Adams' father, I'm sorry, I said John Adams, but I mean Sam Adams' father. Sam Adams actually at one point, all right, needs to go to Hancock, right? And Hancock basically pays a fine, right, to the British of £8,000. Okay. Now I don't know, people that don't recognize this. £8,000 in the Revolutionary times made you close to a billionaire.
Yeah.
That's the kind of power £8,000 had. Right. You were wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If you had spendable cash of £8,000, that was worth £8,000 was worth more than some estates back in Britain.
Yeah.
So I just want people to understand that when we talk about the wealth of some of these people, we're talking real wealth. Okay. When I talk about wealth of John Hancock, he was an extraordinary man because he was one of these mercantile assholes, okay, that you were talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he had a good relationship with Sam Adams. Now, Sam Adams, of course, then goes through school, right? He gets a training as a lawyer, all right, which is somewhat disappointing to his father. And his father basically dies early, all right. So he's kind of somewhat orphaned in a way, right, but not really. But he goes as a lawyer. He gets into political things and political speech, right? He also he is one of the founding members of the Sons of Liberty. All right. The Revolutionary Nine that they talk about.
He says revolutionary. I might want to use the term traitors, but yeah.
Well, they called themselves the Loyal Nine of Boston.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, these and of course they begin to discuss something that I have brought up on a continuous basis, which is we don't owe loyalty. We as American citizens, we as colonists, don't owe any loyalty to Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we recognize the surency of Parliament? We recognize the surency of Crown. We don't recognize the surency of the Parliament. Okay? And they begin agitating along those lines. This is setting up a major demarcation point, all right? Where, okay, we remain British subjects because we're under the British Crown, but we're not under the Parliament, the British Parliament. The British Parliament has no control. There needs to be an American Parliament, right? which is one of the things they begin agitating for. And of course, the other thing he begins agitating is against any kind of act by Parliament to regulate commerce within the United States, within the colonies. What are the colonies? He begins saying, look, you have no authority to issue these things. And let me tell you something. When they talk about the taxation and anti-taxation legislation and everything, they didn't just, the Sons of Liberty and the Loyal Nine did not just gin up public against these people, okay, saying, hey, don't pay your taxes, don't pay your loyal tax. They would literally run, all right, these people out of town. Tax collectors, English tax collectors and stamp collectors were run out of town repeatedly, okay? And violently, in some cases, okay? They were physically tarred and feathered. There was a lot more tarring and feathering going on than people want to admit of people that, not necessarily the people who disagreed with them, but of people who actually tried to enforce or enact any of these laws. All right, that they disagreed with. This is one of the reasons why many of these acts, when Parliament would put them into effect, would then turn around later on and get repealed. They were put into effect. They were never paid. You're not getting any kind of revenue from this. The whole idea from Parliament's perspective was to gain revenue. Well, they're not paying it. All they're doing is they're taking the tax collectors and they're basically burning them in effigy or basically threatening their lives. Right?
Yeah.
And of course, when this, of course, that everyone talks about is the Boston Tea Party and the most memorable aspect of this. Well, Sam Adams, all right, gave a speech, which many historians claim the words he used were the euphemisms and the go-ahead that he was dictating start the Tea Party, right? Mm-hmm. He was giving orders, right, to the Sons of Liberty to take the Tea Party into effect. Now, he himself did not participate in the Tea Party. He was a good ways away when the Tea Party happened.
Okay.
And there's reasons for this, of course, which comes down to, quite frankly, plausible deniability. I didn't be part of this. I didn't say go riot. Okay, but and of course, there's no real, documentary evidence that his speech was the go ahead in the Massachusetts Parliament to do this, right? Even though technically that was possibly took place. Mm-hmm. You see my point?
Yeah.
Right. So these things have to be understood about who Sam Adams was, and when the Tea Party took place. Let me tell you something. As an agitator, right, for against the British had bolos out on him. Right, on the lookout. Okay, this was one of the people they were trying to hunt for. Okay, and if he ever fell into the hands of the British military, he'd have been hung. Okay, I'm not even sure they would have had a trial. Okay, and this goes back to something else that I don't think people really understand about society today. For us to go to Boston, right? If a person in Boston needs to be arrested, right? For example, how quickly can the police descend on that residence to arrest him?
Theoretically, very quickly, yes.
All right. Well, assuming the roads are clear, you get into a car, and however long it takes the car to get there, right? For the most part.
Yeah.
You didn't have cars then. Okay. You were going to try and do this. You were going to have to use some other mode of transportation. Well, what other modes of transportation were there?
You mean there was a time before cars? What is this heresy, sir?
All right. So the other form of transportation was what? Horses, right?
Yes.
Okay. Who had horses? I'm serious. Who had horses? In the British military, horses were designated in only certain units, right? You
Yeah.
had a cavalry unit, but if you didn't have a cavalry unit, the only other people who possibly had a horse were a commanding officer.
Yeah.
And not, when I mean a commanding officer, I'm talking somebody like major and above, not the lieutenants. The lieutenants, very few lieutenants had horses because very few of them. Got to remember back at this time frame, folks. The British system and the officer corps, and this is ubiquitous to the other officer corps around the world, right? Paid for their own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the officers who had a horse because they purchased the horse, they owned the horse, which meant they were making enough money. Understand this? They were making enough money to afford a horse because horses don't feed themselves.
True. One thing, just for anyone British, when he says lieutenant, he actually means lieutenant. I just thought I'd explain it for those that know, not just the colonials. Carry on.
It's lieutenant. Learn how to speak your own
lieutenant.
freaking language or learn how to spell it correctly.
And you're talking about the British officers. It's lieutenant. Thank you, sir.
Is there an F anywhere in lieutenant? Show
Is
me
there
the
a W?
Show me the letter F.
Is there a W?
The L-I-U. It's Lou, not woo.
So you're using the French definition. What can I say? If you wish to speak French, go ahead. Oh no, that's
It's
right.
A-E-I-O-U. Ooh, right? Ooh. And is there an F?
No.
Show me any. Tell me if you spelled if lieutenant was L-I-E-U-T, which is how it is. L-E-U-T. Excuse me, L-E-U-T. If you had nothing else after that, how would you pronounce it? Loof.
No, I know it'd be loot. I know. I do agree with you with the pronunciation of it based on its spelling, but my point being, you are talking the British military, therefore it is lieutenant.
We're going to talk tradition now.
Mm-hmm. Hey, look, just because you guys haven't had a country for the past 300 years, don't feel bad.
We have our own traditions, all right? And your traditions also accommodate freaking Parliament, something we found reprehensible. That's something that I think people understand. Have to understand. We didn't find the British Empire reprehensible. We found British Parliament reprehensible.
So did most people.
And then we found Queen George reprehensible when he sent freaking Hessians after us. But that's British.
Yeah.
Right? But Sam Adams at this point. Now people ask, well, did he try several things? Of course he tried several things to be.
I'm saying nothing.
We're not going to. I pronounce it Colonel. Yes.
Mm-hmm. No, your pronunciation is correct. Unfortunately, it's the spelling that's the problem.
Well, the Colonel or Colonel. I mean, that's how I always differentiate. Yeah. But regardless, right? He tried several things, including, of course, he tried to become a brewer, which is where the whole this whole thing comes from, right? Mm-hmm. That's a reference to him as in his efforts to start a brewery, which was basically from his father and so forth. Now, which goes to another thing we need to talk about. Okay, we're talking about the fact that you can't just oh, look, I'm right there to arrest you. Well, you also didn't drink water.
Yeah.
Generally. Okay. And the reason people didn't drink water was because the rivers, and the people did, okay, don't get me wrong, people did drink water, but the rivers were not clean. Okay. For a variety of reasons, mainly human habitation. Yeah. Right? Sanitation was somewhat questionable. When you're downstream from the guy, pissing and shitting in your river,
yeah,
you are basically ingesting some of that. Good afternoon, Coleman. All right, and of course, this means you're ingesting feces and so forth, right? So these things are not germ free, is what I'm trying to point out. And as a result, most Americans, unless they were in the deep woods where you had, streams or had your own wells, all right, didn't really drink water all that much. Their general staple of drink was beer. Okay, so breweries were very important because, quite frankly, they sterilized the product.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so beer drinking and drinking was very, very much in vogue, and this was something, especially in the winter time, where human activity went down. Okay, remember, you can't travel, all right, by car. My ability to drive through the rain is wonderful, but if I don't drive with the top down on a convertible. Nobody does. Okay, well, back in the day, when you're dealing with carriages and things like that, yeah, some of them had tops, but even then, you didn't have freaking glass windscreens.
No.
Right? Those you couldn't afford it. Right? Glass. That's another thing. Glass making very expensive back then. All right.
Yeah. Oh, I'd like to point. It's not so much that it was expensive, which it was. It was more the transportation of it was extremely expensive.
Right. Production wasn't as expensive as the cost of transportation. Yes, that's very true. Okay. Because you're riding across a rough road, right? What are you using to limit the shock? Well, then you got to use, all you have is cloth, right? I mean, you don't have foam. We haven't created foam. There's a lot of things in modern day that we take for granted, right? Like I said, clean drinking water. I'm telling you now, folks, for the people out there who don't understand this, clean drinking water was a premium. There's a reason why adulthood, okay, was an achievement. Because most people, children died quite often, all right? Many people buried their children. Many people, something that we rarely see today. It happens, but it's rare when a parent buries a child today in comparison to what it was like back then.
Yeah.
But getting out of infancy, all right, was an achievement. It was an achievement. Okay. Now it didn't become like a celebrated achievement in the Asian cultures. For those people who don't know, the Asian cultures have 100-day celebration. Okay, and what the 100-day celebration is, after a child is born, if it survives 100 days, they have a celebration of the child's birth. Right, because so many children died before, so many babies died before their 100th day. All right, that it would be looked upon as the same as having a miscarriage. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is these situations are a lot different then. Right? So the British, of course, if they ever got their hands on Sam Adams, because they considered him a real rabble-rouse, he was right up there with frickin' John Adams. Right, but at the same time, he wasn't as rich, right, as John Adams. Or I said John Adams again. I meant Sam Hancock. Yeah. John Hancock. I called him Sam Hancock. John Hancock.
You'll get his name close. It's similar.
Well, I know a Sam Hancock. Anyway, I don't know if he's related to John Hancock, but really, he's also a physicist. But the Sam Adams wasn't as rich as John Hancock, and so he couldn't buy protection. Let's say. All right, but he also was very much like his cousin, a fierce believer in the cause, okay, of liberty. All right, and that it applied to everybody. Okay, and this is something else that most people don't understand. Now, I've already related that John Adams had defended the British soldiers, all right, in the Boston Massacre. Right?
Yeah.
Now, while that took place, Sam Adams is one of the people who helped pay Paul Revere for doing the engraving, all right, of the Boston Massacre. All right. And was writing also, and was one of the people who was postulating that it was a Boston Massacre, right? Calling it a Boston Massacre, and he was also one of the ones who probably created the uprising that the protest. He was one of the people who marshaled the protest that turned into the Boston Massacre, for example.
Yeah.
Right. Just so people understand what they were looking at. Now, there's one thing to protest and angrily threaten, like what people talk about protesting today, real protest. And it's another thing when it goes over and becomes a riot. The moment you get physicality involved in there, it becomes a riot. This is where the demarcation always was and always has to be. And it's one of the reasons why, if you're talking about you have the right to defend yourself, well, if you have a right to if everyone has the right to defend themselves, that includes soldiers.
Yeah.
And if you start throwing snowballs, well, it's a snowball, right? There's a snowball, MC. Yeah. Snowballs mixed with rocks. See, you start crossing the line.
Yeah.
And that took place. Okay. Like I said, tar and feathering constabularies, right? The military forces were on foot. You got to understand something about the purpose of a cavalry unit, right? A cavalry unit is very important and it's very effective in doing certain things.
Mm-hmm. Because innocently.
There's no evidence that I was at the Boston Massacre.
He knows. He was very
There's
careful
no
to
evidence
leave
that
the
I threw a
evidence.
snowball with a rock in it.
It has to be said, though, you do seem to know an awful lot about this.
Things that I've read. Just things that I've read.
Sure.
But if you have, like I said, cavalry is used in the military. You know this as well as I do. That has a very specific military purpose, and that is to interfere with logistics lines, communication lines of the enemy. All right, to get in the rear and cause massive disruption. All right, that's its primary purpose. Always has been raiding and raiding the logistical chains. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't you use them like a police force? Why wouldn't you use them like, okay, well, why didn't they send cavalry units to go take out John Adams? Well, the reason is because the cavalry, all right, is very specialized, all right, and it's also, especially at this time, it is a premier unit.
Yeah.
Right? People want to have the cavalry. It's a glory unit. What glory do you gain by being a policeman?
Right? Yeah. That might be a bit of a dangerous statement given the modern situation, so I'm just going to choose to gloss over that one.
Well, I mean, you are there to enforce public order. The whole purpose of police and the policeman type of actions, right? Policing actions is to enforce public order.
Yes.
Not you. In fact, you are doing this at the need to say, look, order is more important than my belief that what I think is right or wrong is taking place.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you perform an action, let's say you're smoking weed, right, and the policeman busts you for it, right? The police are busting you for it, and that policeman himself may think that smoking weed isn't a big deal and there's no reason to be doing this, but he's enforcing the law because it is the law.
Yeah.
Because those are what the rules, the established rules are. Okay.
Now, one thing. I'm sure you've probably understood this, but a lot of people seem to fail to understand one thing about policemen. It originally comes from Latin of polis man, i.e., man of the city. Did you know that?
No, but that's okay. Go on.
Okay, it's just one. It was created, like you said, to keep the peace. The fact that a lot of judgment has now been put upon the police to do this. After all, the policeman can choose. I mean, if you're speeding, was you doing it for a good reason? Yes or no, by the opinion of the police officer themselves. It's questionable, but they allowed that judgment, whereas back in the old day, they followed the rules to the letter, at least as long as they were paid by the right people, if you know what I mean.
Well, the right people were also the ones that were writing the laws.
Yeah, true.
I mean, I hate to say that, but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
They were also the ones that came up with lèse majesté. All right.
Yeah.
Which, for those who don't know what that is basically, you can't insult the crown or any of the aristocracy that represents the crown. Right. Which, at this point in people don't realize this, but that was a crime.
Mm-hmm.
That was a crime in Britain. That was a crime in the American colonies if you made a derogatory comment toward the king or his court. Okay. Now, in actuality, in practice, they enforce that in America far more diligently, and I mean this because it was important. You got to understand something. This is why it was important in America to make this distinction. In the early parts of prior to the Revolution, right, insulting the king was not tolerated. And the reason it wasn't tolerated is your very existence on that continent was owed to the king's patronage, to the king's largesse.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in Britain, they had already gone through, the Cromwell Revolution.
Yeah.
Okay. There was already an attitude of, kings are expendable when you don't murder. Right. So if you really want to bitch about the king, although the law still was in force, this is something it was tended to be ignored unless it became very egregious unless you created an incident or a faux pas type of incident that riled up the people. Right. It was ignored. But in America, that was enforced a lot tighter for a longer period of time because the colonies themselves were royal charters from the king. So you had something called lèse majesté, which is you couldn't insult the king. Well, okay. Many of the governors were like, yeah, well, we're going to enforce the lèse majesté. They were far more diligent about enforcing it. Now, at the time of the American Revolution, it had slipped largely from where it had been just 20 years prior. Okay, 20 years prior, it still had a lot more force, so even in comparison, the British soldiers and their commentary versus the American the Americans at that time, the British colonists at that time were far closer in a certain regards, all right, than many people understand. This is why it was such a shock, all right, with the introduction of mercenaries like the Hessians.
Yeah.
This is why another one of the reasons that piles onto this, because it's like lèse majesté. The king just declared war on us. We didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He's allowing these mercenaries to rape and pillage, and the incidences of pillage are well known. I mean, military pillages quite often. The rape did take place. Raping people did take place, although it was not nearly, the sensationalism of the rape, all right, is overblown. Does that make sense?
Oh yes, yes.
Right. And in the cases of pillaging, did women get raped in the stuff? Yes. Was it mass rape that the people envision on in things like manga and things like that? No, it didn't take place like that. All right. Were there cases of in history? In history, when you saw the fall, when you saw an area and a population being subjugated, rapes generally weren't a major thing. All right, there were times when that did take place. Okay, especially in the Asian cultures. But I'm not going to talk, but that has to do with a different. Quite frankly, it had to do with a different aspect of what people looked upon as sex.
Yeah.
Right, sexuality was completely different in the Western world versus the Eastern world. Right, you have to understand that. In reality, the Western world view of sex is a lot more closely, I should say, closely, the word, more closely aligned to the Middle Eastern philosophy.
Well, I would point out that at the time you're discussing, people didn't actually believe that sex produced babies. You literally prayed to God and hoped you got pregnant. Sex was just a bonus, quite simply.
Yeah, I think that they understood that sex kind of had something to do with procreation. All right. But I think it had to do also with a difference in value of human life as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what is a baby worth? What is a child worth? In Middle Eastern cultures and also in Western cultures, there's overall there's a more respect for life as a whole of the individual life. Understand the individual life as a whole. Okay, and that's the difference. It's the primacy of the individual. The Middle Easterners, even though some of their philosophies denigrate the individual, all right. Overall, and even some Western philosophies, when you talk about spirituality, when you talk about religion, the religions of the West and the religion of Islam, all right, have certain things in common, and that is the subservience of the individual to the religion. Okay, Understand this. Now, they take about it, they go about it in a slightly different dynamic. But if you talk about it, and that's also true of the Eastern cultures as well. But the Eastern cultures places no other value. There's no secular value basically on the individual as well. All right, that's one of the biggest differences between the East and the Middle East, in my opinion. All right, has their view of life, whereas the individual matters. Does the individual matter? Yes, individual actions matter to a point. Now, do the religions hold the individual accountable or not? It becomes another issue. But I'm really going far afield here. I'm digressing.
Yeah,
that's how you
said.
Don't get me wrong. There are some ignorant people out there.
Yeah,
there are people that are just stupid, right? That don't understand. I guarantee you the idea of having sex, all right, not knowing that it caused procreation. Look, folks, anybody who grew up on a farm knows procreation causes it's done with sex. All right, so people who say that they didn't, these people were too backwards and didn't know this. No, they knew. All right.
In fact, technically, they probably knew better than most of the air quotes civilized people.
Well, that's very true. The people that were like the aristocracy, it's possible that the aristocracy never encountered that. Unlikely as that seems, there are probably people who never understood sex and horses and things like that, even though they owned dozens of them, because they didn't take care of them. They just rode them.
Yeah.
All right. You really have to be sheltered technologically, and to be able to not understand that sex produces children.
Fair.
Right. And I'll be honest with you, that includes most of today's world, because most of today's world isn't rural. Right. They don't encounter sex and animals. Honestly.
True.
Right. So if you don't see sex in animals, you don't see animals procreating, then how are you going to sit up there and be able to make the leap that procreation was via sex? But once again, we're way off subject here.
Yeah.
Right. Back to Sam Adams.
Mhm.
So Sam Adams, being one of the leaders, right, gets elected to obviously the Massachusetts colonists. Right. He is one of the representatives that then goes on to the First Continental Congress as well. It gets elected as one of the representatives. Right. He is one of the people that is really the British are really got a hard on to try and capture. Right.
Mhm.
Because as while at the time John Hancock helped him recover, pay the fine of £8,000.
Yeah.
Eventually, all right, he begins to become a success on his own because of his practice, because he's a hell of a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
And as a result, he becomes quite wealthy himself, all right, and he's well known for helping, using this wealth to help the colony, to help people, all right, in different straits. He's someone who believed in the cause, all right, and puts his money where his mouth is. Right, he runs papers now, and in fact, that's how he becomes rich. Is once again, he becomes a publisher. Very, 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 very much a strain of publishing that goes on in these things. And one of his good friends, of course, is Thomas Paine.
I'm seeing a pattern with publishing here. It has to be said.
Distribution of philosophy being controlled by the publishers. Right, thought is being expanded because of the people like. All right, a publisher like Sam Adams. He then goes to the Continental Congress. He is part of the Massachusetts delegation that signs, of course, the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
Right. So now the war takes place. He does his part as much as anybody. Okay. As much as any of these leadership. He is not a spry young man. Okay.
Yeah.
His wife, he does marry late in his life, and he's very devoted. He's very much in the mind of, very much in the similar mindset of John Adams, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that he's very devoted to his wife.
Yeah.
Okay. And his children, and unfortunately, none of his born children, right? Basically, he outlives them all.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and so he ends up adopting. He also adopts several children, right, to become his children. Right. After the war, he becomes a delegate once again to Massachusetts, and eventually replaces John Hancock as governor. Right. Now, he himself is not happy as governor. he doesn't like being a governor, right? And like all people, when they get in, you got to remember he was born in 1720s, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's an old man now.
True.
Okay, and he's of ill health, and so he steps down early as governor to allow another governor to come in, and because he wants to live his life. And unfortunately for him, right, it turns out that they couldn't do without him, so he ends up being forced back to being a governor again of Massachusetts. Right, and he's not. I mean, he's a good governor, but he's also one of the governors that puts down Shays' Rebellion. Right, he's against Shays' Rebellion because, and the reason for Shays' Rebellion is they're saying that they're no taxation without representation. Well, but you do have representation. You do have people that you are sending to the Massachusetts colony, right? You just don't like the fact that you don't have enough of them, right? So he is one of the people who is instrumental in breaking Shays' Rebellion. Not that Shays' Rebellion had much of a chance of happening anyway.
Yeah.
Right. He then leaves and basically dies, and he is recognized, right, as one of the founding fathers. He is recognized, all right, as one of the primary movers that created the revolution. Until other names, he starts to slowly, throughout history, starts to get ignored in American history. And by the late 1800s, early 1900s, people have forgotten his contribution. All right, he is just another name that signed the Declaration of Independence, rather than being one of the founders and one of the more prolific writers of thought during that time that sparked the revolution. And as the British get a hold of him, they basically not only downplay his role, they exacerbate the role as just being a ne'er-do-well, rebel rabble rouser, right? Specifically in the British Almanac, or the Britannica, right?
Yeah.
And of course, it's written from a British perspective, so of course they would do things like that. But people tended to forget the role that this man played, right? And once again, he gets relegated, like I said, to this. And we all fall into this category. A lot of Americans, including myself, fell into this category, not intentionally, but your initial view of him is based on what people say about him and other people that you talk to about history, about who this man is, right? And he becomes a stereotype, right, as a brewer, when his brewing career, which was a failure, right, really wasn't all that long.
I'm just waiting for you to say he may be pretty much forgotten, but he still made better drink than Coors.
Coors is I know a lot of people take the piss out of Coors because a lot of people piss Coors.
That's better, thank you.
but Coors is not as bad as people think it is.
Sure.
The problem with Coors beer, all right. Tell me the difference in taste between Coors and an American brewed Budweiser.
How am I going to put this? One, I'm not a drinker of beer. The whole thing just tastes like moldy cardboard to me. So it doesn't actually matter which of them you're talking about here. They all taste like moldy cardboard. So technically, it's a bit awkward there.
The Coors has fewer hops, I think, in the actual brewing process. So therefore, it doesn't taste as to many people, it doesn't taste as flavorful, right? But is it alcohol? Are you drinking it to get drunk, or are you just drinking it because you like the taste?
This is fair.
Beer, American beer is an acquired taste. American wine, though, is an acquired taste as well. There's very few, and I say American beer versus the European beers, because whether you like it or not, certain beers in Czechoslovakia, certain beers from Germany or Belgium, the first time you drink it, you like the taste right? It's not like American beer. It does not have that bitterness in the background that American beers have generally. I drank Sam Adams beer. It's bloody disgusting. It tastes like burnt toast.
I like the way he compliments it by calling it burnt toast. That's at least a halfway decent flavour.
I must admit I didn't see that one coming here. Right. Tell for Aaron's bright. Coors and Budweiser taste like my kidneys. Guinness, all right, which I do love, right, is also an acquired taste.
Yes.
Right. So beer in general, wine in general are acquired tastes. Now,
Mhm.
one thing that that Americans when they talk about breweries, all right, yes, you brewed beer, all right, but
Mhm.
you also, as part of you also were going through the distillery. Brewers and distillers were kind of the same, right?
Yeah.
So rum was always a big thing.
Yeah.
Right, and rum was huge. In order to become a sailing nation, you had to your sailors drank rum,
Hmm.
right? Why did they drink rum? For the same reason that people drink beer. It was more hygienic.
Yeah.
And in fact, during the War of 1812, right, one of the tours, right, by the USS Constitution against the British, right, they went out on a long tour and they left with like 70 cases of water, right? So much rum, so much of this other stuff. And so, through the several battles at the USS Constitution and seizing of different British ships and so forth, it went out with 70 cases of water and so many cases of rum. Came back with almost no rum. This is after they had, all right, taken, all right, several ships, like, and I mean dozens of ships, right? They came back with almost no rum, right? All these other, goods that they had seized, right? And 70 cases of stale water.
Kind of says something, doesn't it?
Kind of puts things in perspective of what the sailing life was like back in those days.
Yeah.
Right. So, but it's interesting. People need to rediscover what right, the roots of the revolution, and more than anyone else, all right, as far as his writings and everything goes, Sam Adams is one of the people who put it in the plainest terms.
Hmm.
Right, explaining why Parliament's actions, okay, were not just not beneficial to himself or his father, but not beneficial to America, not beneficial to the colonies. All right, colonies that were in existence not because of Parliament, but actually in spite of Parliament in many cases, that existed, all right, because we were chartered from the king.
Yeah.
Okay, these were people that wanted to escape the British parliamentary system in a lot of cases.
Hmm.
And we came a whiskers. We came a whiskers breath. Okay,
Hmm.
people don't know this, but we dodged a bullet in the fact that we became very close to having Cromwell come to America. Cromwell almost instead of creating the whole Cromwell Revolution, actually almost ended up coming to America. He was seriously thinking joining the Puritans, all right, over in the Dutch that had left Britain, all right, and ran to the Dutch. The Dutch before the Dutch came over, and the Puritans became over to America. Go to a pile of Evian.
He's not wrong.
Look, I'm not. We're not talking about. We were talking about water again.
You can take the mickey out of the Americans, but I will point out one thing. They created the good stuff. They started brewing moonshine. And I don't think I need to say any more, really.
Distilling, it's not brewing.
Putting it in cup and drinking it. Shut up.
There's a bit of difference there. There is a bit of difference.
Sure.
Really, I mean, we distilling became very, very popular, right? Because why did distilling become popular? Well, distilling became popular because what are you going to do with grain? All right, Americans became very rich in excess grain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, what do you do with it? Well, you can either let it rot,
True.
or you can make it rot and get alcohol out of it.
Yeah. Theoretically, though, you do have to be careful in case it turns. I believe it's argot. So maybe you don't want it to rot in the wrong way.
Right, exactly. That's in other words. So you wanted to keep it safe. So you could either mill it, but once you had so much of it, once you became self-sufficient in foodstuffs, and that's really the one thing that I think that people failed to recognize is America, for all of its other problems, was self-sufficient food-wise.
Yeah,
we became a breadbasket. We became a breadbasket of the world to an extent. Right, you could always come to America and trade for food. All right, if you needed foodstuff in France, if you needed foodstuff in Britain, if you needed foodstuff in somewhere in the British colonies down in the south, or in, for example, right, in the Mediterranean.
Mm-hmm.
America was where you went to get corn. America was where you went to get wheat. America is where you went. There was food stuff here. It isn't. Most people forget the fact that the farming that was taking place in the South eventually gets supplanted by these big plantations that are growing tobacco and growing cotton. But the reality is before all that, right? They were growing corn.
Yep. I had
told there's an interesting history of talking about the life of Americans who fought for the British during and after the War of Independence. Many of the loyalists, all right, in the northern part, many of the loyalists in the north left and went to Canada.
True.
Right. Not all, but many. In the South, many of them, many of the people in the South did not want to go to Canada, okay, because quite frankly, the weather sucks, right? So even though some did, right, a lot of them also left and went to Britain or the British Isles, or left and went to British colonies in Africa, specifically South Africa, and in the Caribbean. All right. The problem with the Caribbean, of course, is that it's full. So going down the Caribbean didn't make a whole lot of sense. Fleeing to Florida, a lot of them then were willing to go. Okay, we'll go to Florida. We'll but they then had to accept the fact that they were under Spanish rule before Spain sells Florida to the United States. Sells Florida to the United States. Rather than our de facto seizing of it. Because of the
America
British.
did nothing wrong. Just remember that.
Yeah, well, we for all intents and purposes, we forced the seizure of Florida simply because of the British.
Yeah.
Right, that's very true. Right.
By the way, have you noticed how almost everything that happens to America, they blame on the British? Just saying.
We don't blame everything on the British.
Name 3.
Things that we don't blame on the British?
Go on.
We didn't blame Pearl Harbor on the British.
Actually, you did. No, actually, you did.
There were people like me that have made comments about the British knew that the Pearl Harbor was coming.
And there we go.
And they did provide plans for Pearl Harbor to the Japanese. That's true too. But we don't blame you for Pearl Harbor happening.
Mm-hmm.
If we blamed you, you would have been visited like the Japanese were. Just pointing it out.
Please note, he's only given one suggestion so far, and he then admits
I'm not done. Though we got sidetracked on it. We didn't blame you for the Panama Canal. We didn't blame you. Okay. We didn't blame the British for the sinking of the Maine.
Okay. Go on.
Right.
Mention
we didn't blame you for the San Francisco fires.
You would have if you could. Let's be fair. All right, I'll accept that.
And we didn't blame you for the Louisiana Purchase.
Was that a bad thing?
Some people think it was.
Okay. Technically, it did mean because of that you did end up with Mad Dodge, but you can't really claim him as a bad thing. Nice try.
Most Americans didn't blame you for the Irish.
No, but then again,
We give you credit for the Irish. We don't blame you for it.
fair for it. Fair for it.
Right? I mean, to say that we give you, we blame you for everything. No, not really. Right? We don't blame. We didn't blame the British Empire for the Barbary pirates.
True. I'll accept that one. Okay.
And we didn't. Nobody in America blamed the British for the Civil War either.
I'm going to argue that, and I'm going to argue that based on the fact that a lot of the North really weren't too chuffed with the British with how friendly they were with the South. So
they may not have been happy with the British treating the South diffidently, all right, but that doesn't mean they were blaming. They didn't blame the British for it.
Sophistry, sir. Sophistry.
What do you mean sophistry? Were we throwing cannonballs your way?
Did you raid one of our ships and steal the diplomats?
We didn't steal them. We arrested them.
There we go.
And did the British arrest Americans or seize an American ship so they could arrest several Russians? All right, just a few years prior to that.
Yes.
Okay, there you go. That's not blaming them for the Civil War. That's just ignoring them during it.
Did you forget the part of Rule Britannia? Britannia rules the waves. It's kind of part of it.
Do you realize Americans have never don't sing Rule Britannia, nor do we recognize it aside from someone singing it is obviously British?
Hey, we understand you don't get how it really should be, but it's okay. We still love you. You're still our little child. It's all right.
The next time you sit up there and sing Rule Britannia, let me know when you get a couple of aircraft carriers that are sailing at the same time. When was the last time there was the British fleet sailed anywhere?
When was the last time that the American fleet done anything useful?
We did a lot of useful things in the Persian Gulf with the American fleet. We were just allowed to finish the job.
Mm-hmm.
That has nothing to do with the American fleet. That has everything to do with American politicians. You know that. That
is true. Like I say, I actually do partially agree with you there, so I'm not actually going to argue that one with you.
I'm not saying the American Navy is how should I put this? The American Navy is the American Navy. The American Navy is never, with the exception of Marines, right? Mm-hmm. The American Navy is not an elite force, all right? But that does not mean it isn't overwhelmingly powerful. Yeah. Understand this. The certain aspects of the American forces. You can take any specific American force and say that these guys are better than this aspect of the American force, except for the U.S. Marines. All right, no one's going to argue that the American Marines are not a frickin' premier fighting force. Right? No one.
I would agree, except for one teensy little thing. The U.S. Marines are just one of the groups, whereas the real Marines, which are the Royal Marine Commandos, are a completely separate thing, and they come to you. You don't get to go to them.
Well, if you're going to go, but the Royal Marines are also a land-based force, and if you're going to start comparing land-based forces, I'll take your Royal Marines against our freaking Rangers anytime. Well, our Rangers as they used to be. Let me put it that way.
That's better.
All right.
Okay.
You're going to tell me the guys that climbed Pointe du Hoc, all right, during World War II were not equivalent to anything that you guys had, from a commando perspective?
I will give them the respect that they are due. Yes.
Okay. Now, granted,
Nonetheless,
once again, it's an aspect of learning from the British on how to do it, but that's not the point.
look, I don't overly have a problem. It's just the U.S. Marines I start to, but I'm allowed to. Let's face it. We're both Army. The Marines are at best something that's vaguely useful to throw at the enemy, while the real people get to go and do the job.
Well, no, they're necessary. Let's be honest. All right, they have the U.S. Marines more than any, are the best at seizing a beachhead and establishing a beachhead than any other force that ever existed. Period. Yeah. And that is its primary role in life, and it does it well.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay, and it's specialized to do that. All right, and it performs that specialized function better than any other nation's been able to from an invasion force perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Marines are an elite force. The Marines have a lot going for them. They have limitations as well. There's a reason we call them jarheads. Okay,
yeah.
Right? And I have a lot of respect for Marines, but you got to their mentality. Okay. Is different than normal people's. Once you go through Marine boot camp, and when you go through the Marine viewpoint, right, and you get indoctrinated and you become a Marine, Marines do not look upon the rest of the world the same way as humans do.
No, that is true. I'm not disagreeing there.
Right, and you'll find this out when I found this out very, very clearly. Right, when I was talking to a former quote unquote former Marine who was still a Marine, right, and so I was in a group, and this guy looked at this guy named his name was Jay, right? And he looked at Jay, right, and he said, "What are you thinking about right now?" Right, because we were conversation had gone down and it had been quiet for a while. You know, some people can't handle the fact that people aren't talking, right?
Yeah.
And I realize that on a stream you can be people want to hear conversation because you're trying to present a show, but the reality is when I'm by myself or when I'm with chatting with my friends, there's oftentimes I will be quiet. I won't be saying things. I won't be carrying a conversation because I don't care to. Right? But anyway, we'd gotten to that mode, and this person just decided that they wanted to ask Jay what he was doing. What he was thinking, and he was going, "I was thinking how I could kill all of you if you decided to stab me in the back. How I would take one of this pen." And the guy was shocked. The guy was shocked, and it was like, "I can't believe you would do that." He's like, "Look, this is what they train us in the Marine Corps: is okay. If the situation turns bad, what do I need to do in each of these situations?" So he's running scenarios in his head. All right, if this person does this to me, I react this way. If this person does this, that's a Marine.
Yeah,
folks.
Yeah.
That's what they're like.
So if you ever want to really upset one of those sort of geniuses, what you do is just after just taking his sip of his drink, just ask him how his drink is. Just check if it tasted funny. It's brilliant because they just give you this strange, fascinating look. I'm not saying I have. But it is fun because you see this expression on their face of he's joking. Then they look at you and it's you're joking. Yeah, sure. Let's just say that. Enjoy your drink. Trust me, they will not drink that drink, or if they do, actually, if they do, they're generally halfway decent. But the really paranoid ones don't. It's kind of funny.
No, they won't. They'll look at that as okay. So you did something to my drink. Give me another one.
Yep, they will go get their own.
The Marines have a different mentality. I'm telling you, it's not that they're bad people or anything. It's just that they're no longer fully human.
It's true.
Right? As we understand humanity, there's a part of humanity that they've either I don't know if you would say they ascended from, all right, or it has been removed from them. I'm not sure which one you would apply.
I think that you almost said the correct word when you said descended, but yeah.
But if you look, you can't use the word descended, and here's why. You can look throughout human history, and you don't see Marines as a group, as a societal group, You can see them as an off. You can see elements of an elite corps, yes, but as a group that you would say these are Marines, right?
Mm,
Because they're not.
no, no.
There's nothing like them. I know a lot of people want to call them the Neanderthals, but if you look at Neanderthals weren't like that. That's not how Neanderthals work, right? Neanderthals were not Marines, right? They were vicious, all right. They were tough-minded. They were meat eaters, right? But from a societal standpoint, they didn't act like the way Marines do. Right? That's why I said you can't use the word descendant.
MC, they weren't Marines because they hadn't developed crayons. That's all. And that says it all, really, doesn't it?
All right. On that note, I think we're done talking about Sam Adams anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming, everybody. I hope you managed to learn something. I did. And, well, yes, thank you, MC, for actually putting on the show for us. Hopefully, we'll be back next week with the next victim. Honestly, are there any left?
Victims? You called him a victim?
Yeah. I'm English. Of course I call him a victim. But seriously...
Are you saying that I'm a victim because I'm not British?
No, you're not a victim. We feel sorry for you, but you're not a victim.
Okay. I was wondering how you're applying all this. I'm kind of curious now. Anyway,
who would you like?
The next person you would like to who you would like to know about?
Honestly, I would be hard pressed to think of anyone else. I think we've done all of the major names. Actually, do you know what? Since finding out that there are part of the founding fathers involve women, how about we do something on the women?
Okay, you want to do something on the women in the Revolution, American women in the Revolution?
Well, I'm specifically thinking the American founding fathers that women enjoy that concept.
Well, there are several, right? We could talk about. We'll do a quick view of course, Abigail Adams. Right?
Yeah.
We will review her. I can see that we'll talk about Betsy Ross.
Yes.
We'll talk about her, and we'll talk about Molly Pitcher.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So how about those three?
Actually, I think that's a brilliant idea. The only one that I know even anything about is Betsy Ross, but I am more than happy to sit and learn.
All right, and we could also talk about Martha Washington.
Okay. Again, I'm going to ask the same question.
There's a reason.
Sorry, you've already answered. It's not the one that they called Martha's Vineyard because of her. Got it?
No, that's very true. And if you want to talk about someone who really wasn't necessarily, you can't say was a founding female father in a way. You know what? I'm going to include her anyway. We'll talk about
okay.
We'll talk about what the wife of the 5th president.
Okay. Cool. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming, and hopefully we'll see you all next week. And again, thank you, MC, for what you're teaching us. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.